Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano, and welcome back for another exciting, fun-filled episode of the Gold Standard in Iowa Conservative Podcast. You're joined here in Studio 130 today with John Hendrickson and myself. John, no giggling. It is all business today.
That's right.
None of that funny business. All right. Well, John and I had a limited pre-production meeting today, and so now we're sitting down and like trying to figure out what it is we're going to talk about today because we're all over the place.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, if this feels even more disjointed and haphazard than usual, you'll know the reason why. But anyway, I do think there's a lot we need to cover today, John. So, how are you today?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Well,
I'm a little worried about our mail delivery because I was hoping to have some new artifacts to show folks, and they haven't showed up yet.
Well, and I wasn't here yesterday afternoon, and you got artifacts, and I missed it. So
yeah.
I'm disappointed you didn't bring President Hoover either.
I know, I forgot that. After we're done, I'll leave them in here permanently.
Because all we have is the plain white conference table.
Yeah.
Which, if you were on YouTube or Rumble, you could see that.
That's right.
You know, which you're supposed to be on video watching us. But no, you got John and I on a plain white conference table. We got no gnome. We've got no President Hoover bobblehead and no artifacts.
We're in tough shape.
Just plain white political noise here.
That's right.
Okay, well, then let's just jump into it. I think I just want to bounce around to start with today, John, because there's just kind of update on what's happening at the legislature. And it's been a strange year, and for a number of different reasons, but it feels like things have started to really slow down. The agenda is being narrowed. Some of the bills are moving. Some have already done. And I suppose some of that's natural in any given legislative session. But, I don't know. There's really an update right now about, in particular, the AEA bill, other than I think since our last episode, it is still, it's a version has left the House. The Senate is still working on it. The Senate is much closer to the governor's package, but, we'll see. I suspect the Senate will end up moving something that looks much more like the governor's bill on this subject, but we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, I don't know if anything you've read or seen on this.
No, I think that's right.
There have been some smaller things, though, that are kind of interesting. And we spent a lot of time talking about local government and local governance and this idea of local control. And there's one that popped up, interestingly, over about the last week that, although isn't really an ITR issue, did kind of get bogged down in this local control issue, which was a bill on stormwater regulations. And the reason I bring this up is twofold, John. One, and I think you've at least been aware of some of what's going on in this bill. One is it was this tension point between are the stormwater regulations and runoff and things in new construction of homes, should those be regulated by the state or each individual community? And so this was more of creating a statewide framework or changing the statewide framework to make sure that it's not done by the locals. But what was really interesting is the bill actually died on the floor of the House when it first came up. Did you see this? I know we talked about it briefly.
Yep.
I don't want this to turn into a monologue, John, because I just don't have enough info for that. But anyway, but that is very rare. Usually, if the bill gets called up for debate, they got the votes because that's kind of the job of the floor leaders, make sure you got the votes. That happened to me in my years as majority leader, I think once, that a bill failed on the floor. And it wasn't on a high-profile issue. It was, it mattered to the people that were on it. But it's really frustrating as a floor leader to do that because you plan to get these things done. So they had some absences in the House and lost a few votes at the very end. People have flipped over to kind of go with the local control side of things. But they came back and passed that last week. So just kind of interesting inside the Capitol drama.
It just seems like this local control issue is picking up steam, and it's being applied to so many different issues.
Well, and it's, yes, and now it almost feels like that enough legislators have bought into it now that they're just using it for everything.
Yes, yeah.
And what's interesting is they use that to fight off any reform that would come to,
That's
no,
right.
no, don't change anything.
Yeah.
But if you follow that to its logical conclusion, why aren't they up there advocating for completely unrestricted ability to do whatever they want? Like
That's a
I
good
don't
point.
I don't see them arguing for, hey, do away with all your restrictions on property taxes and let us tax whatever we want.
Yeah.
They don't seem to come up and argue against the whole idea of local budget review by the state. They don't seem to want to argue for, letting them regulate in whatever way they want. It's only in the opposite. They only use that to stop
Yes. Yeah.
the pro-taxpayer, pro-freedom reforms.
It's very similar to the the Biden administration using democracy as a response to every single issue.
Sure.
Today.
Well, if you get people to start buying into it, you might as well just use it.
That's right.
Ride that as long as you can.
Yeah.
So it's kind of frustrating, but there's some other another thing that's very rare at the legislature was the nullification of an administrative rule.
You were sharing with that.
That's
this morning.
very rare.
Yeah.
I only remember it once in my 12 years at the legislature, and it was early on. And I don't remember if it was it was somewhere in my first couple of terms that we nullified a rule. So because we talk about the rulemaking process here and the regulatory burden, the way this is, and it's actually interesting because it shows that the legislature still has oversight that they can exert on this. But the proposed rules come out, and it can be anything from utilities and banking all the way down to elevators and plumbing and cosmetology and whatever. Every department that has regulatory authority in the state of Iowa has rules. And so they promulgate these rules or publish them. And after they put them together, the first step is they have to go to the Legislative Administrative Rules Review Committee. And that committee can actually pause those and refer them to the whole legislature, which is what happened on this. And it actually had to do with some sports gaming rules. The substance of the issues notwithstanding, it's just interesting that this went so far as the legislature actually taking action on that. And they voted, I think there was only one or two dissenting votes. It was an overwhelming bipartisan vote to say, no, that particular rule does not go into effect. You need to go back to the drawing board. Yeah. Usually what would happen is the rule promulgating authority would step back and say, okay, let's fix this before we go through this whole process. But that didn't happen here. And so I actually had a chance to talk to the chair of that committee, at least in the House side, is Megan Jones. And I talked to Representative Jones. She was really excited about it because she had a chance to do it in all her years. But she takes that committee very seriously and does a good job. So anyway, I just think it's interesting. And maybe it's just because I kind of like the functioning of the legislature, but there really is authority in that. And some of those rules really do impact Iowans. And so I think it's a very good thing to see the legislature exerting that power that they have over the administrative state.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, and I think, the idea of legislative oversight is really important to the whole overall political system. And this seems like an example of the legislature exercising their oversight authority.
Right. And we've advocated, John, for new laws which would amplify the legislative authority or make it harder to promulgate the rules. This is just another step in the process. And so I think it's important to point out when the legislature does actually use the tools that are at their disposal.
Absolutely.
To rein in and not getting into the whole issue of sports gambling rules. So just interesting sort of rare things. Another bill that caught my eye, John, a local thing, is a bill to bring the taxation of Broadlands Hospital here in Polk County into line with the rest of the county hospitals across the state. So they've had sort of special ability to tax at a higher rate here in Polk County for Broadlands. Well, that's sort of a carryover from when they needed the money a whole lot worse than they do now. I don't know. You're a man about town. Yeah. So, you see these ads on TV and construction for Broadlands all over the place. Yeah.
I mean, they're high quality ads.
Well, sure.
And they're competing with Mercy and Unity Point, and so I'm wondering, is it time to privatize?
Well,
if they can afford all this expansion and all this media, and
15 to 20 years ago, Broadlands truly was the indigent hospital. It's where you went, last resort, couldn't get treatment anyplace else. And that has changed. And I think a lot of it is the change. And they really were struggling. They were ready to, I mean, they couldn't fold, but I mean, it was really dire over
Yeah.
there. And having been there, and kudos to their leadership of sort of remaking the thing, but especially in the era after Obamacare
Mm-hmm.
in the ACA. Now there really shouldn't be much, if any, indigent health care that's necessary, because you should have something coming with you, whether it's Medicaid or Obamacare.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm sure there's cracks in the system, but why do they need property tax levies to fund that system when they can use the other revenue streams available? And so anyway, there's a bill coming that would probably true that up a little bit. So I'm really interested to watch and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Okay. What else do we have here from the legislature, John? REC coming up. We talked about that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting, but that'll be the final piece of the puzzle as they go to transition to building the fiscal year 25 budget and tax cuts.
Yeah. So
what's the data? Do you remember when that is?
It'll be Friday morning.
This coming?
Yeah, this coming
Oh,
Friday.
okay. So
Yep.
Friday, I
Yeah,
guess would be the 15th.
Yep.
All right.
And I think it's
Well,
either
circle your calendars.
Yeah.
That is must-see TV.
yeah, 10 or 11 o'clock.
Okay. All right. Well, good.
Yep.
And they, you know, the interesting thing is they give sort of a economic outlook forecast that comes with that
Yeah.
and where we're heading. It'll be interesting because nationally, I just think there's a lot of Americans that still have questions about this economy and where things are heading, and they're struggling, especially with inflation
Absolutely.
and those prices. But I think there is some glimmers of hope out there that maybe things are starting to turn around a little bit. And so be interesting to see how those folks on the REC view us going forward. Last thing, John, on sort of legislative updates, though, is we talked about universal basic income. That's moving. That bill, which will ban the universal basic income pilot projects, that I was watching, I think it was over the lunch hour, actually passed subcommittee, and they're running it out of committee in the Senate, hopefully. Hopefully today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that bill's
That's
moving.
good.
But I thought that the three members, the Republicans on that subcommittee were Senator Scott Webster and Senator Mike Buslow, who I thought both did very well in their comments. Senator Tony Bisignano from Des Moines, who seemed pretty upset about the bill, that you know, it's another effort to try and regulate Polk County and Des Moines from afar. I thought that rang a little hollow to me.
Yeah.
I mean, especially since Senator Buslow's from right here in Polk County, and
Yes,
he seemed
yeah.
you know. But his comments, which he's really good on, I don't know, you've seen Senator Buslow.
Yes, yeah.
You know, talking about, are we creating things that are a disincentive to work?
That's a great point, actually.
You know, look, we believe that it's a misuse of taxpayer money.
Yeah.
But is it even serving the end that they think it does? And so you had this whole host of characters from every nonprofit in central Iowa. But is this even really helping long term?
It isn't, and that's a good point that the senator raised, because if you look at when you have really generous welfare, and we can look at examples here in the United States and even in Europe. In college I had a really good friend from Sweden, and one time he was telling us that he could make more money on Sweden's public assistance program than he did working, and so he basically said, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but why work?
Yeah,
you know, because he said they could pay me more for staying at home.
That's exactly right.
And we've seen this example in here as well, because when you know, before they did welfare reform, you had a lot of people that were in prolonged poverty that had no incentive to work, and and this is why I think work requirements are good for those who are able to work, and the same thing with all the COVID stimulus that kept a lot of able-bodied men from working.
Yeah.
They were just staying home. The government was paying them to stay home, and that's not a good situation. I think you could see the exact same thing happening with some of these universal basic income programs.
You know, there's obviously a number of people that need some level of assistance and will never be
Yes, yep, absolutely.
full-time workers or whatever that, I mean, conceding that. But for the rest of the population, anything we do by way of public assistance, entitlement, whatever, should be, that classic idea of a hand up, not a handout. It should be about trying to transition people into the workplace or to a point in the workplace where they don't need that government assistance. And Senator Booslow also went on to talk about that is, things like cliff effects, which absolutely have existed. I know specifically you heard a lot about in childcare where, okay, if I get a new raise and that brings me above a certain wage level, then I no longer get my childcare or whatever other, government assistance. We should so government shouldn't be creating these arbitrary levels and programs that box people in to poverty.
That's right. Yeah.
Or even maybe it's not poverty, a lower income sort of level. Let's get people out in the workforce and get them working. So that's good. Well, I'm really excited about that bill because I think not only is it the right thing to do, and it points out the wrong way to do some of these reforms.
It is,
and frankly, it coming back to the whole local control idea, John, it should not be up to local governments to figure out things such as public assistance. I mean, that is the purview of the state of Iowa. So anyway, good. All right. So the other thing that you and I were talking about a little bit earlier, John, kind of moving off of the legislative session, is President Biden's proposed budget in Washington, D.C., which I'm sure most of our listeners are excited about. So is this going to get the balanced budget starting to tackle the federal debt? Are we going to start seeing that come down?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then tell me what it does do, John.
People shouldn't be excited. They should be terrified. And maybe the only good news out of this is that it's probably dead on arrival.
Yeah.
Because of divided government Congress. But just to give a top level view of what it does is it spends about $7.5 trillion for fiscal year 25, and that's about over a $1 trillion increase from the previous budget. But over the long term, it spends about $86 trillion over 10 years. And what it does is basically there's about a 1% increase for defense spending. The rest of it is all expanding welfare type programs, Obamacare subsidies, and Green New Deal initiatives. And the other troubling part of this is that there's roughly $5 trillion in new taxes in this, and what he called for, and he laid out a lot of these in his when he was yelling during the State of the Union address. And I'll just give you a couple examples. And this is from our friends at Americans for Tax Reform with Grover Norquist. But
as an aside, Grover, who will be here,
that's right,
1 week from today,
and maybe he'll comment on this.
Well, hopefully we save that.
I will,
we'll make sure we talk to Grover about it.
But for example, Biden's calling for an increase in the corporate tax rate, so it would go from 21% to 28%, and then combine that with your the federal state corporate tax, we would have a corporate tax higher than communist China.
That seems less than ideal.
Yes, yep. And then he wants to raise the capital gains and dividends tax, which would make our tax on capital gains and dividends higher than communist China. He wants to implement a second death tax, which would be troubling, especially for small businesses and farmers. And just to give you a few more examples, he wants to sign up for this. There's a push for a global tax, a 21% global tax on businesses that we would join with other countries. He would increase small business taxes by close to 40%. And it goes on. And the other part that's really scary is there's nothing in there about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because by 2026 that expires, and all of our listeners, those individual income tax brackets will go away, and all of us will be seeing a significant tax increase if those rates are made permanent. So that's troubling. And so, and what experience has taught us and what history has taught us, when you start spending all this money and you start raising all these taxes, it doesn't really have good economic consequences.
I think at a simple level, look, we oppose any of those tax increases. We oppose letting, for example, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expire, because that's extracting more resources from the American people.
Yes, yeah.
But you're raising all those taxes and not using a dime of it to try and address the federal debt.
No.
Is that not only are you raising those taxes, taking more money from Americans, you're going even further to continue mortgaging our future.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just fiscal mismanagement after fiscal mismanagement, just chasing this of continuing to throw money at the world's national defense, because that 1% increase on defense, I'm guessing that, we're funneling that to somebody or paying somebody else's bills.
Yeah, that'll be going to Zelensky.
Yeah. Or at a minimum, we're providing for the national defense of Poland, Germany, and Sweden so that they can have expansive welfare states.
Yeah.
And not to mention the health care and the Green New Deal and all this stuff. It's just the bill will come due someday.
That's right. That's the scary part. And, it's roughly the national debt under his watch has increased $6 trillion. And I just want to point out that the spending problem, both parties can share the blame.
Absolutely.
I mean, Republicans have definitely failed at trying to rein in spending at the federal level, and so. But you're absolutely right. That's scary because how high can that debt climb before it collapses?
Yeah.
And as we know, that will have impact not just on every American, but on the states as well. Because when Uncle Sam can't continue to write generous checks to the states, that's going to create a huge problem.
That is okay. Let's go there, John, because I think this is an important point. I think we've touched on this before, but what happens when the federal government can no longer live up to their obligations to the states? And that's not this year or next year. Mm-hmm. They can continue to just print money for a while.
Yeah.
So I think what it comes down to, the simple answer to that is just let us have our chunk of the money and let us manage those programs ourselves.
That's right. Yeah.
We don't need your strings attached.
No.
But the federal government's going to have to underfund something at some point. Something's going to break.
Yeah.
I don't want that to be, but it's going to be a very difficult time in American history.
Yes.
When we get to this point where the bill is due. And I fear for that day. And I guess on the way there, I'd rather let Americans keep a little bit more of their money on the way than continue to overtax them and still can't even pay the bills.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
So,
I mean, if that system worked, then, and we've said this all along, I mean, we would see California, New York, Illinois, and even the United States booming right now if the tax and spend agenda worked, and it just doesn't.
Is it was it Thatcher that had the quote, the problem with socialism or liberalism is that you eventually run out of other people's money?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but it's exactly true.
Yeah.
And was it Thatcher?
I think so.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You can't just keep taxing and spending and borrowing forever.
No.
Eventually it runs out.
That's right.
And I suppose there's a school of thought that says we can just keep printing it, inflating our economy, our currency forever. But I don't think anybody instinctively believes that that's true.
No.
So anyway, but Joe Biden's going to try.
Yeah.
And all the while continuing to campaign on the idea of Bidenomics, still trying to sell to the American people that his 3-year reign of terror on the American economy is somehow going to help him get elected.
Yeah, and also within this, within his budget is a numerous tax increases on energy, which is not going to be good.
Great. Let's get rid of all that, and everyone can drive electric cars everywhere.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, can you tell I'm frustrated today, John?
Yeah.
I'm just not having it.
We can all drive electric vehicles and start eating bugs.
Well, yeah, and all of that having been said, still isn't the big news that Joe Biden's been chasing all week, which is still trying to twist and turn and get out of the way of using the term illegal immigrant in the State of the Union speech. Yeah. I mean, he's still trying to walk that one backwards because he made his own party so mad.
Well, that's one thing you reminded me of. I want to bring up, and again, it's the Senate has an important resolution that was introduced, I believe, yesterday.
Yeah.
Basically calling for border security and supporting the efforts of Governor Abbott in Texas, as well as for Governor Reynolds in her efforts to support the border. And so I think I applaud the Senate for doing that resolution. I think that's very important.
Yeah, we saw that also in the ITR Foundation poll. The last one we did, John, is that Iowans are very much in favor of what Governor Reynolds has been doing on the border. And yes, a Senate resolution has no practical impact, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a show of support that caucus and those leaders understand what's going on in the issue, and another show of support for the governor, for our governor, as she tries to be a part of this. And it's a big difference, again, as we've over and over, the difference between red states and blue states.
Yes.
And red states in this kind of environment are having to lead the way.
Absolutely.
And having to go their own way to try and stop some of these problems. So, I appreciate you bringing that up. So anything else you need to bring up?
Well, no, I think it's interesting that, we have that resolution on immigration, and which I think is good, and also send a signal to our congressional delegation.
Yes, that's also very important.
That we're serious. And then also, early on, the legislature passed the strengthening the oversight of foreign land sales.
Yes.
And these are all important issues that the federal government should be leading on, but they're not. And so, thankfully, Governor Reynolds and the legislature are stepping up to try to do something.
Yeah. No, that's right. Well, John, that's good. For not knowing where we were going when we pressed record here, I thought we covered a whole lot of stuff. Yeah. So
I hope our conversation wasn't too pessimistic, because I noticed when you were talking about the balance coming due with the debt, that our screen went dark.
Oh no!
So I hope that wasn't.
Yeah, I promise you, listeners, here at the Iowans for Tax Relief Family of Organizations, we do pay our bills.
Yes.
They did not turn off our TV bill or whatever it is, but we're still ITR Live, even though the logo isn't there. So as I make my plug again for watching us on video, the only thing we have left to offer is the plain white conference table. Right, we no longer have the TV over my shoulder. Yeah. I mentioned it earlier, John, though, but I want to put the plug in again for ITR NFIB, the tax day luncheon coming up 1 week from today, on Tuesday, and that's at the downtown Hilton. And lunch is on us as long as you register ahead of time. Come in here, Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform, in addition to Bobby Kaufman, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and Chairman Dan Dawson of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And we're going to talk about taxes and what's going on in Iowa. So it's going to be a good event. So
it will be. That'll be exciting.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing you all there. With that, we are out of time. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.